Please give a rousing welcome to the 26th President of our United States, Theodore Roosevelt.
Hi. I don't know about you, but I feel as fit as a bull moose. I feel as strong as a hickory knot. And if it weren't so late in the evening, and some of you have been drinking wine, I would suggest that we adjourn immediately and hike up to the Mount of the Holy Cross. Yes, I come tonight not to voice the doctrine of ignoble ease, but of the strenuous life. All great men have a little of the wolf in them. And all great nations have been warring nations. I am America's advocate for the strenuous life. And let me speak honestly, may I? When I look out on the men in this room, I do not see much vigor. I see desk men, pencil pushers, weaklings. Men, may I say, whose shoulders resemble nothing so much as a champagne bottle. And I say to you men in this room, get out and do something. Climb something. Shoot something. Yes. And I say to the women in this room, turn and look at the man you came with and ask yourself this question. What happened? Yes, what happened? You remember that specimen you married long ago, and now look at him. I'm serious. A great nation must have physical vigor. Now, let me just say, I have not always been the splendid specimen you see before you tonight. No. I don't know if you know this, but when I was a child, I had nearly terminal asthma. And back in that time, there was no cure for this. I would be suffocating. My father, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., the greatest man I ever knew, and the only man for whom I was ever afraid, would come into my room and rub my back vigorously, trying to force oxygen into my lungs. We would go out on the streets of New York with all their cobblestones in the carriage, and he would try to force oxygen into me. I disrupted the family so grievously year after year after year as a young invalid. But finally, my father took me aside when I was 12. And he said, my son, your mind is strong, but your body is weak. He said, you will never achieve your potential if your body lags behind. He said, son, I'm going to challenge you today. You must make your body. I was 12. I worshiped him. I looked up at him and I said, I will, Papa. I will make my body. And he bought me a home gymnasium kit, and I began to do jumping jacks and sit-ups and push-ups, and I learned a little of the science of pugilism. And slowly, by sheer will, and I began to do please my father, jumping jacks and sit-ups and push-ups out of decrepitude, and I learned a little of the science of pugilism. Virility. And slowly, by sheer will and desire to please my father. And by the way, I graduated summa cum laude. I dragged myself out of decrepitude into something like my private physician virility. When I graduated said, Mr. Roosevelt, but even at Harvard, where I had a private physician, and by the way, I graduated summa cum laude. Probably my private physician when I graduated said, Mr. Roosevelt, few years you have remaining, I urge you to lead an entirely sedentary life. You should not. Do you know what I said to him? Probably. And he said, live for example, long, I would urge you never, in the few years you have remaining, I urge you to lead an entirely sedentary life. I said, look, Because of
Yes.
what you said, I'm
You know what I
going to
said to him?
bound up every flight
he
of
said,
stairs I ever come
for
to.
example,
I would
urge
rather
you
die on
never
those stairs than be some
climb
person
up
in a rolling chair.
a flight of stairs.
And slowly,
I said, look,
I made
because
my
of what
body.
you said,
I'm going to bound up
began
every flight of stairs I ever come to.
strenuosity.
I would
Now,
rather die on
I
those
went out
stairs
to
than
the
be some
Badlands.
person
Have
in
you
a
heard of them
rolling
in
chair.
Dakota?
I had
Slowly,
gone out there to kill a
I
buffalo,
made my
and
body,
I got it eventually, and I began strenuosity.
I fell
Now,
in love with the Badlands.
I went out to the Badlands. Have you heard of them in
It's a
Dakota?
marvelous part of the world.
I had gone out
One of
there
the
to
last
kill a buffalo,
frontiers.
and
You
I
know,
got it eventually.
U.S. Census Bureau declared the frontier closed in 1890.
I fell in love
There
with
were
the
just a few
Badlands.
pockets left of the real West.
Oh, it's a
And
marvelous
I wanted to
part
get
of the
my one of the last
transfusion
frontiers.
of the
You know,
energies of this
U.S.
West
Census
before
Bureau
it was
declared
too
the
late.
frontier closed in 1890.
So I went out to Dakota.
There were just a few pockets left
get a
of the
buffalo.
real West.
And if
And
you
I
can
wanted to
imagine it,
get
at that
my
time, there had once been
transfusion of the
60
energies of this West
million
before it was too late.
bison in this country.
Think
So I
of
went
it.
out to Dakota. They were as
To
thick
get a
as
buffalo.
prairie dogs. And if you can imagine it, at that time, by the time I got
There had
there
once
in
been
1883
there were no more than
bison in this
500
country.
bison
Bison left on Earth.
Think of that.
They were as
They
thick
came
as prairie
this
dogs.
close
To extinction. By the time I got there,
And I went on to help
1883,
save the buffalo, but I wanted to
there
get
were no
mine
more
before
than
they became
500
extinct.
bison left on Earth.
And that's what took me to Dakota.
They came
And I had a
this
terrible
close
hunt.
to extinction.
And my guide, a man named Joe
And I went
Ferris,
on to help
thought
save the buffalo, but I wanted
this
to
is
get
gonna be
mine
hard for
before
you
they
to
became
understand.
extinct. But he thought I was some sort
And that's
of a
what
New
took
York
me to
dude.
Dakota. And I had a terrible hunt. I wore corduroy
And
trousers.
my guide, a man named Joe
I have
Ferris,
this high-pitched voice
thought-
that goes falsetto whenever
This is
I'm
going to be hard for
excited.
you to understand. But he thought
And
I
I
was
wore
some sort of a
spectacles,
New
and
York
spectacles
dude.
out there were seen as a moral failing.
I wore corduroy
There
trousers.
were no obstetricians in
I
Dakota.
have this high-pitched voice that goes
You
falsetto
accepted the
whenever
eyes
I'm
that you
excited.
had.
And he did not want to take me, so
And
there
I
aren't
wore
any
spectacles,
buffalo
and
left.
spectacles
Really,
out
maybe a
there
few
were seen as a
stragglers.
moral
It's not
failing.
worth it. But I said, we're going.
There were no obstetricians in
We
Dakota.
went out, and for 10 days,
You accepted the eyes that
we
you
sought
had.
and he did not want to take me, so there aren't
we
any
had a
buffalo left.
miserable
Really, or
time.
maybe a few stragglers.
It
It's not
rained.
worth it. But I said, we're
And
going.
the mud was gumbo.
So we went out,
And
and
we
for
couldn't
10
find
days,
any critters.
we sought. One night, we
bison.
couldn't get back to the line
And we
cabin,
had a
and we slept
miserable
out.
time.
And we decided we made a
rained.
terrible mistake.
And the mud was gumbo.
We decided to use our
and we
saddles
couldn't find any critters.
as pillows. One night we couldn't get
But
back
we
to
kept
the
them
line
tethered to
cabin,
the
and we
horse.
slept out. And we decided we made a terrible mistake.
And in the middle of the night,
we
some
decided
wolf or
to
something
use
cried
our
out. The horses
saddles
bolted as pillows.
And we spent 2 hours in our red long
we
johns
kept them tethered
chasing
to the
these horses to get the saddles back. And then we finally
And in the middle of the night,
got down to
some
sleep.
wolf or something cried out. The
And then
horses
it began to
bolted.
rain. And we spent 2
And it
hours in our
rained
red
as
long
much
johns
as in
chasing
the
these
Noatic
horses
flood.
to get the saddles back. And then we finally
I don't know about you,
got down to sleep.
but have you ever awakened
And then
in
it
a
began to
pool of
rain.
water?
Have you ever been
And it
camping
rained
when you
as
wake
much
up in a
as in
pool
the
of
Noatic
water? Flood. It is by no means pleasant.
I don't know about you,
And
but
I
have you
sat
ever
up
awakened in a pool of
just
water?
as bedraggled as you could
Have
possibly
you ever been
be.
camping when you wake up
And I
in a
looked
pool
over
of
at Joe
water?
Ferris, and he was sitting up looking
It is
at
by
me
no
from about over
means
there.
pleasant.
And I knew what he was thinking.
And I sat up
He was thinking, this dude
just as
will quit
bedraggled
now.
as you could possibly be.
I knew
And I
this
looked
was one
over
of the
at Joe
defining
Ferris,
moments
and
of
he
my
was sitting
life.
up looking at me from about over there.
I looked over at him, and I
knew
said,
what he was thinking.
by
Godfrey,
He was
but this
thinking,
is fun.
dude will quit now.
And when you're
I
hiking the
knew this
mountains,
was
one of the
here
defining moments of my
or
life.
fatigued with some
I
exercise.
looked over
and
at
you
him and I
just
said,
have
"By
had enough.
Godfrey,
and
but
you're
this is
miserable and
fun."
You just want to whine. Next
And
time,
when you're hiking the
I
mountains
want
here,
you to say,
by
or
Godfrey, but this
fatigued
is
with
fun.
some exercise.
And I hope
you
the
just
people all over the mountains
have had
here will
enough.
hear you.
And you're
And
miserable
it'll be
and you just want to
infectious.
whine.
Now, when I got to Dakota,
Next time,
I made some
I want you
really
to say,
terrible
"By
rookie mistakes.
Godfrey, but this is fun. There
And
are
I
the
hope the
spectacles,
people
of
all
course.
over the mountains here will hear you.
There's my voice.
And it will be infectious.
And the fact that I spoke
Now,
with
when I
actual
got to
grammar
Dakota,
offended many.
I made some really terrible rookie mistakes.
But they saw me as a
There are
sort
the
of
spectacles, of course.
yet another Easterner with too
There's
much
my
money who
voice.
comes out to the West
And
and,
the fact
wants
that
an
I spoke with
adventure
actual
and
grammar
isn't really
offended
ever going to be
many.
one of us.
And
So
so
they saw me as a sort
I'll
of
tell you the worst of the
yet
stories.
another Easterner with too much money who
I
comes out to the
participated in
West
these
and
roundups.
wants
They
an
would last for
adventure
5
and
or 6
isn't
weeks. We
really
were out
ever
on our
going to be
horses.
one
It
of
was
us.
a very wild sort of adventure
so-
because we're bringing up all the calves.
I'll tell you the worst of the
and then
story.
you brand them. And this
I
would we'd go
participated
from
in
one
these
ranch to
roundups.
the
They
next.
would
This is
last for
before
5 or
barbed
6
wire
weeks.
was
We were
there.
out on our horses. It was
So this was a very
wild
big
sort of
adventure
community
because we're
bringing
bringing
up all the calves.
calves, and I'm not a great ropist.
And then you brand them. And this would
good
go
enough
from
on
one
a
ranch to
horse.
the next. This is before barbed
So they
wire was
assigned me
there.
the job.
And so this was
when
a
they were
very
branding these
big
calves
sort of community work
What
festival.
they would do is they would rope.
And I'm not a
the
great
hooves of the calf and
ropist.
drag it into this circle, and
And
then I would have to
I'm
lean
good
on
enough
it and
on a
hold it
horse.
down.
So they
And
assigned
then
me
they
the
would take
job
a red hot
when they were
iron.
branding these calves.
and press it into its flank.
What they would do is they would rope. They would
the
also
hooves of the calf and
cut
drag it
off
into
its
this circle.
testicles, and then I would have to lean on
And
it
I can
and
tell
hold
you
it
that
down.
this is something that the calves did
And
not
then they would
like
take
very
a
much.
red hot iron,
And so they squirmed
and
and
they
press it
kicked,
into
and
its
they were.
flank.
It was rough. It was dirty
They
business.
would also
it was exhausting
cut off
business.
its
It was
testicles.
dangerous business. And I could
But I
tell
did
you
it
that
because
this
I
is
wanted
something
to be
that the
accepted.
calves did not
I wanted
like
them to
very
know that I
much.
wasn't just another one
And so
of
they
those
squirmed
dudes
and they kicked,
that I
and
meant
they were. It was
to
rough
make
my
it was
way
dirty
in
business.
this
It was
place.
exhausting
That I was a
business. It
small
was
D
dangerous
Democrat,
business.
even though I'm a
But I
Republican
did
in
it
my
because I
politics.
wanted
Of
to be
course,
accepted.
Who wouldn't be? I wanted them to know that I wasn't just another
there
one
was
of those
this
dudes.
young-
That I meant
this
to
young
make
buck,
my
this
way
young cowboy,
in this place.
handsome,
That I was a small
wearing the
D
finest
Democrat,
sort of
even though
things,
I'm a
and he knew
Republican
that the
in my
ladies
politics.
found
Of course,
him
who
attractive.
wouldn't be? And so instead of working, he would
And
sort
there
of
was this young,
lean on the
this
fence.
young buck, this young cowboy,
Strike pose,
the
handsome, wearing the finest
the
sort of
laconic
things.
Western
And he
man.
knew that the ladies found
And
him
because of that,
attractive. Several of the
and so
calves
instead of
squirted
working,
out.
he would sort of,
And believe me, once
lean
they
on the
squirt
fence.
out, you are not getting them back
Strike
in that
poses,
circle.
the
And so I'm
laconic
down on
Western
this ground.
And because of that,
Offended
several
by
of the
his
calves squirted out.
laziness. And believe me,
without even
once they
thinking
squirt
about
out,
it,
you
I
are
said,
not getting them back in
"Hasten
that
forward
circle." quickly there. And so I'm down on this
Hasten forward quickly
ground.
And
And
they
offended
all
by his
laughed.
laziness. They had never heard such a locution
And without even
before in the
thinking about it, I
Badlands.
said,
Hasten forward.
quickly
Because
there.
of that, for the rest of my time
Hasten
in Dakota, when I
forward
would see
quickly
these
there.
cowboys on the street, they would say,
And they all
hasten
laughed.
forward, Mr. Roosevelt. They had never heard such a locution before
And
in
in
one of the
Badlands, hasten
taverns,
forward.
one of the saloons. And because of that, for the rest of my time
was
in
even a
Dakota, when
drink
I would
called
see
the
these
hasten
cowboys on the
forward.
street, they would say, "Oh, hasten forward, Mr. Roosevelt." Now I can take a joke as well as the next man. And in one of the
But once
taverns,
they
one of the
start to
saloons,
bully you,
you must fight.
There was even
My
a drink
view
called the hasten
of
forward.
violence is this.
Avoid
Now I can
it
take a
when you
joke as
can,
well as the next man.
But when you can't avoid it,
But
make sure
once
he will not
they start
get
to
up.
bully you, you must fight.
And I'll tell you one
And
more
my view
important story
of
about
violence is this.
Avoid it when
I had
you
a
can,
ranch called the Elkhorn,
but when you can't avoid it,
35
make
miles
sure he
north
will
of the
not
railroad
get
tracks.
up.
And this was
And
my
I'll tell you
primary
one more
Dakota ranch.
important story
And I had
about
58
Badlands.
horses, but there were no fences, and so they were wandering
had a
about, and
ranch
they'd become
called the
scattered,
Elkhorn,
and we needed them for the roundup.
35 miles
and so I
north
said to
of
my
the
hired
railroad
men,
tracks.
tomorrow, I'm
And
going
this
to
was
ride
my
out,
primary
and I'll bring them
Dakota
in.
ranch.
And I had 58
Which I
horses,
did.
but there were no fences, and so they were
But it was
wandering about, and
so
they'd become
difficult
scattered, and
in
we
that
needed them for the
terrain
roundup. And so I said to my hired men,
Then by
tomorrow,
dusk, I was
I'm going to
by
ride
no
out,
means
and I'll bring
close
them
to
in.
the ranch.
And I had not brought
Which I
any
did.
sleeping roll.
But it was so difficult.
Fortunately, I was
terrain
on the Montana border.
that by dusk,
place called
I was by no
Mingusville.
means close to.
Do you know how it got its name? And I had not brought any. The husband and wife who
sleeping
founded
roll.
the town were named Minnie and Gus.
Fortunately, I was on the Montana
That's
border.
the West, Mingusville.
A place called Mingusville.
So I rode into this town, and this
Do you
was
know how
like
it
a
got its
scene
name?
out of a dime novel.
The
of
husband
the
and
old
wife who
West.
founded the town
I went to
were
the
named
hotel, Minnie and
Shabby
Gus.
Little Hotel.
The town had only been
That's the
founded
West,
two or 3
Mingusville.
years previously. So I
went
rode
up to
into
the
this
desk and I
town,
said,
and
"I
this
should
was
like
like
a
a
room."
scene out of a dime novel
The
of
man
the
said,
old
"Well,
West." I went to the hotel,
fine.
the shabby little
Plenty of
hotel,
room.
and then I said,
The
"I'm
town
as
had only
hungry as
been
a
founded
wolf.
2 or 3 years.
Where can I
previously.
get a beefsteak
I
in
went
this
up to the
town?"
desk and I said, "I should like a room."
He said, "Well, you're out of luck."
The man said, "Well,
There are no restaurants here
that's
yet.
fine." And he booked
I
me
said,
a
"Well,
room.
what do you
And then I
expect me to
said,
do?"
"I'm
He
as
said, "Well,
hungry
there's a
as
saloon
wolf.
over here. Where
If you
can I
go
get
into
a
that
beefsteak
saloon,
in this town?"
It's quite possible that they can
He
serve
said,
you
"Well, you're out of
a
luck.
meal."
There are no restaurants
Now,
here
I don't
yet."
know about you.
I said, "Well, what do you expect
I
me
am
to
not
do?" He said,
fond
"Well,
of
there's a
saloons.
saloon over here. If you go into that saloon, no man
It's
goes
quite
into
possible
a
that they
saloon
can
who's
serve
not
you
looking
a
for
meal.
trouble." No,
This
I
was
don't
one
know
of those
about you,
saloons
with the doors, you know.
But I am not
That
fond of
saloon?
saloons.
And so I had this need.
No
for
man
food, so I
goes
walked
into a
in,
saloon who is not looking for trouble.
and it was dark.
And there was
This was
blue
one of those
smoke,
saloons
and
with the doors,
My
you
eyes
know?
had a hard time adjusting,
That
and I soon
saloon?
realized that some sort of an
So I
incident
had
was
this
unfolding there.
need for food, so I walked in.
And when my eyes
Cleared.
cleared,
It was dark.
I saw a
was blue
gunman
smoke, and
my eyes
with
had a hard
both
time adjusting, and I
pistols
soon
out.
realized that some sort sort of an
shooting up the
incident was
bar.
unfolding there.
A man
And when my eyes cleared,
shooting up a bar
I saw
in the
a
Old West.
gunman with both pistols
This
out,
was one of the greatest moments of my
shooting
life.
up the bar.
You can't buy this kind of tourism.
A man
I'm in an authentic
shooting up
bar
a
with a
bar
gunfighter
in the
shooting.
Old West. He was shooting at the feet of the patrons. He shot. This was one
bottles
of the
on the bar.
greatest
He shot the
moments of
only
my
clock
life.
in Montana.
You can't buy this kind of
And all the
tourism.
patrons were hiding.
I'm in an authentic
and
bar with a
avoiding eye
gunfighter
contact
shooting.
and
He
so
was
on.
shooting at the feet of the
And so
patrons.
I
He
did
shot
not want to fight this man. Of course,
bottles
he had
on the
guns.
bar. He shot the only clock in
And
Montana.
here was my thinking.
And all the
If I
patrons
walked very
were
slowly
hiding
and unobtrusively to a
and
back
avoiding
table,
eye contact and so on.
maybe he won't see me.
And so I did not want to fight this man. Of
But
course,
he
he had
did.
guns. And here
And
was
he
my
said,
thinking.
"Oh,
If
I
Four
walk very
Eyes, is
slowly
it?
and unobtrusively to a back
Here's
table,
Four Eyes. He will stand
maybe
a
he
drink
won't
for the
see me."
house.
But he did.
I sat down.
And he said,
hoping
"Oh,
he
he would desist."
Four Eyes,
He
is it?
came up to me. and
Here's
he
Four
loomed
Eyes. He will
over my
stand a
table.
drink for the house.
And I could smell his fetid breath.
I sat down.
And he had both guns. Hoping he would desist.
And he said, I repeat,
He came up to me.
this Four
And
Eyes
he loomed
will
over
lie
my
around
table.
for everyone.
And I could smell his
Just
fetid
think about
breath.
this for a moment.
And he had both
What would
guns.
you do?
And he said, I
What would
repeat,
you do
in this
This
situation?
Four Eyes will buy
Well, you'd buy
around
the
for
drink, of
everyone.
course, you're Vail.
Just think
So,
about this for a moment.
I noticed
What
that
would
in
you
his
do?
inebriation,
What would
he had
you
placed
do
his feet
in this situation?
too close together.
Well, you'd buy the drink.
And
of
his
course,
center
you're
of
Vail.
gravity, therefore, was by no means adequate.
So,
I
and so the
noticed
next
that
time
in
he
his
vociferated
inebriation,
this, I looked up at him meekly and I
he had
said, well, I
placed
suppose
his feet
if I have
too close
to,
together.
I have to. And
And
as
his
I,
center
you
of
have
gravity,
told you, I
therefore,
have
was
been
by no means
pugilistic.
adequate. And as I
And so the next
rose,
time
I
he
hit him with a
vociferated this, I
right,
looked up at him meekly and I said,
and
well, I
then a left
suppose
and another right,
if I have
and
to,
down he
I
went.
have to. And as I, you,
And
I
as
told
he
you, I
went
have
down,
been
both
pugilist.
pistols were discharged.
And as I
This
rose,
was the
I
greatest
hit him with
moment
a
of my
right,
life. I was in an
and then a
authentic
left
Western
and another
gunfight,
right,
and
I
down
looked to see
he
if I'd been
went.
hurt. I wasn't.
And
Luckily,
as
when
he
fell,
went
hit
down,
the back of
both
his head
pistols
on the
were
bar
discharged.
and passed out.
This was the greatest moment of my
I
life.
jumped on him with my
I was in
knees.
an authentic
I disarmed
Western
the filthy
gunfight.
ruffian. I looked to see if I'd been hurt.
And then
I wasn't.
I
Luckily,
saw
when he fell,
human
he hit the
nature.
back of his head on the bar.
So all of those who
and
had been
passed out.
cowering came up and
I jumped on him
rebuked
with
and
my knees.
said bad
I
things
disarmed
about
the
him,
filthy
cuffed him a
ruffian.
little. And then I saw
tied him up.
human nature. So
We
all
put him on a
those who had
freight
been
train.
cowering came up and
And he was
rebuked
never seen
him,
again.
Said bad things about him. And
I
cuffed him a
sat
little.
down and I ate my beefsteak.
We tied him up, and then I went up to my room.
We put him on a freight train,
and double locked the door.
and he was never seen again.
And from that moment,
I sat
the
down
people
and I
of the
ate my
Badlands of
beefsteak.
Dakota began to take me serious. And then I went up to my room. You see that there are
And
these
double
pivotal
locked the
moments
door.
in your life when you have to decide if you're
And
a
from
man
that
of courage
moment,
and strength. The people of the Badlands of
reverse.
Dakota began to take
I
me
proved
serious.
myself. I proved
You
myself
see that
because I
there are
was
these
willing to do
pivotal
the hard
moments
work.
in your life when you have to decide
If there was an
you're
extra
a man of
need
courage
for
and
a
strength.
night ride around the herd, I always
reverse.
took it, even if I were in the saddle
I
for
had
40
proved
hours.
myself.
I proved
I slept
myself
on the
because
ground. I
was
didn't
willing
demand
to do the
anything
hard work.
that anyone
If
else
there was an
didn't
extra
have.
need for a night
Slowly they
ride
began
around the herd, I always
see
took
me
it, even if I were
as
in the saddle for
authentic.
40 hours.
And I will tell you this.
I slept on the
Had
ground.
it
I
not
didn't
been
demand
for that
anything
time in Dakota
that anyone else didn't have.
I would never have been the
Slowly
president
they
of the
began
United States.
to see me as
That was the
authentic.
proving time. And I will tell you this.
Now, I
Had
love
it not
Colorado.
been for that time in Dakota,
I have been here many times.
I would never have been the president of the United
I
States.
remember
That was the proof.
my cougar hunt west of here
Now,
on the Eagle River.
I love
I
Colorado.
came out as vice president to kill
I
a
have been
mountain
here
lion.
many times.
And of course, the local people wanted to assist in every way, so
remember
they got
my-
all of these wonderful hunting dogs.
my cougar hunt west of here on the Eagle River.
And they had their horses, and we went off. And
I came out as vice
they went
president
ahead
to
of me,
kill
and we were having a
mountain
tough
lion.
time finding a mountain lion. And of course, the local people
And
wanted
finally
to
they-
assist in
they
every
got
way, so they got
the wind of one
all
and
these
chased
wonderful
it
hunting
and-
dogs
and
ran it up a tree. Is what
And they had their
usually
horses,
happens.
and we went off.
And
then
went
it was
ahead
up
of
there,
me,
and the
we were having a
dogs
tough
were snarling
time
and
trying
trying
to
to
climb the
mountain
tree.
And finally they got the wind of one and chased it
As I
and-
rode up,
and ran it up
the
a
mountain
tree. is
lion
what
jumped
usually
off of the
happens.
tree and into the midst of these
And then it was up
slavering,
there, and the
vicious
dogs were snarling and trying to climb the
fighting
tree.
each other to get to its throat. And the horses
Finally,
were behind them.
As I rode up,
The mountain lion, of
the
course, was
mountain lion
terrified.
jumped off of the tree and into the
My
midst of
handler
these
said, "Mr.
slavering,
Roosevelt, you may
vicious
now
dogs
kill your mountain
who were
lion."
fighting each other to get to its throat.
Do you know what I said?
And the horses were behind them.
That's not
The
sport.
mountain lion, of course, was terrified.
To shoot a mountain lion that's helpless
My
here?
handler said, "Mr. Roosevelt, you
And
may
so what
now
do you think I
kill
did?
your mountain lion." I took a Bowie
you know what I
knife
said?
out of my hands.
That's not
I
sport.
waded in through those dogs
To
and
shoot
I
a
killed
mountain
that
lion
mountain
that's
lion
helpless here?
with my knife. And so what do you
Now,
think
which
I
of
did?
your recent presidents would do that?
I took a Bowie knife out of my hands.
That's sport.
I waded into
I also
those
was in
dogs
Cripple
and I
Creek as
killed
vice
that
president
mountain lion
because I was
with my
campaigning
knife.
for William McKinley. You know,
Now,
he had
which of your recent presidents would do that?
porch. You know, he stayed on his porch and people had to go to Canton
That
to talk
sport.
with him, and he sent me out.
I also was in
campaign for
Cripple
him.
Creek as
And I was
vice
campaigning
president
in Cripple Creek. It was
because
a
I was
time, as you
campaigning
probably
for
know,
William
great labor
McKinley. You know, he had a
unrest.
because
Porch,
McKinley
he
was
was
a
stayed on
gold
his porch
standard
and people
man,
had to
and
go
these
to
were
Canton
silver
to talk
sorts.
with him, and he sent me out.
They were angry at him and
campaigned for
particularly
him.
angry
And I was
at me.
campaigning in
I was
Cripple Creek.
traveling
It was
the
a time,
country, and I was
as you probably know,
sort of in the
great
same
labor unrest
zone as
there.
William Jennings Bryan, who was the
because
Democratic
McKinley was a
candidate.
gold
You know Bryan,
standard
don't
man,
you?
and these were silver sorts.
I called them a
They
human
were angry at him
trombone.
and particularly angry at me. And I was traveling the country,
a
and
man
I was
more unfit
sort of
for
in
the
the same
presidency, I
zone
can't
as William
imagine.
Jennings Bryan, who was the Democratic
And I was in
candidate.
Cripple
You
Creek,
know
and
Bryan, don't you?
The laborers were angry, and
I
they
called them a
began
human
to heckle
trombone.
me.
And then they began to throw rocks at me. And
A
then
man
they were
more
using
unfit for the
2x4s.
presidency, I can't imagine.
We didn't have any secret service.
And I was in
at that
Cripple
time,
Creek,
of course.
and
I would have refused it
The
anyway.
laborers were angry, and they began to heckle me.
And then my handlers,
And then they
though,
began
said,
to
"You
throw
must- you
rocks
must
at
leave
me, and then
immediately.
they
You
were
must get in the
using
car-
2x4s.
in the train." I said, "No, we didn't have
I'm
any
not
secret
going to turn
service
my
at that
back
time,
and
of course.
run.
I would have
I'm going to
refused it
stand
anyway."
up to these men.
And I
Listened
listened
to
to
them
them
for a while, and I walked
said,
slowly and
you
got
must leave
into the
immediately. You
train,
must
and
get
then
in
I
the
said,
car-
I'm getting
in
on
the
the
train. I
caboose
said,
so
"No.
that they can see me,
I'm
that
not
I am
going to
not
turn my
afraid."
back and run. I'm going to stand up to these men."
My handlers were beside themselves.
And I listened to them for a while, and
And
I
I
walked
walked slowly
to
and
them.
got into the train, and then
And
I
they
said, I'm
gained some
getting on the
respect for
caboose
me,
so that they
even
can
though
see
they
me that I am
fully
not
disagreed
afraid.
with my position.
That's
My
my
handlers
handlers
were
were beside themselves.
That's leadership.
But you know what? I stood
Now,
up to them.
as you probably know,
They
I came
gained
into
some
the
respect for
presidency
me,
through the back door,
even though
as
they
it were.
fully disagreed with
After my
position.
heroics in Cuba, you
That's
know
how it
that.
works. On July 1st,
leadership.
1898, I led the assault
Now,
up Kettle and then
as
San
you
Juan
probably
Hill.
know, I came into the presidency through the
And I
back
became
door,
an
as
instant
it were.
American hero.
After my heroics in Cuba,
I wrote a
you
book
know
about
that.
it called The Rough Riders.
On
One of
July
my
1st,
40 books.
1898,
I led the assault
I
up
wrote
Kettle
40
and then
books.
San Juan Hill.
No ghostwriters, no
And I became an
amanuenses.
instant American
I
hero.
wrote them. I'm the writingest president in
I
American
wrote a book
history.
about it called The Rough Riders. One of
You know
my
who the second
40
writingest
books.
president is? I wrote
John
40
Quincy
books.
Adams.
No
wrote 18 books,
ghostwriters,
so I'm
no
happy to say none of them is
amanuenses.
readable.
I wrote them. I'm the writingest
I
president
read a
in
book a
American
day.
history.
I read a book a day all
You know who
my
the second
life.
writingest president is?
I had a near photographic
John
memory.
Quincy
it has been said
Adams.
by historians that
He wrote 18 books, and I'm
no
happy to say none of them is
president
readable.
has ever been as intellectually well prepared.
I read
for
a
that
book a
office as
day.
I was. I read a book a day all my life. I had a near photographic memory. It has been said by historians that no
After Cuba,
president has ever been
I
as
published The
intellectually
Rough
well
Riders.
prepared for that
a
office as I was.
sarcastic columnist in Chicago, a friend of mine,
Wrote a review of the
So-
book, and he said it's a great book.
after Cuba.
This is an extraordinary man.
And I
He's
published
going
The Rough
places.
Riders.
He said my only quibble
A
with the book
sarcastic
is the title of the Rough Riders. It
columnist
should have
in
been
Chicago, a
called
friend of
Alone
mine.
in Cuba. Wrote a review of the book, and he said it's
But
a
I
great book.
therefore swept into the
This is an
governorship of
extraordinary
New
man.
York.
He's going places. He said my
It was
only
a
quibble
two-year
with the
term,
book
and I'm
is
a
the title of the Rough
reformist.
Riders. It should
I
have
believe
been
in good
called
government,
Alone in
civil
Cuba.
service reform. I'm a progressive,
But I
I believe the
therefore
government
swept
should
into
play
the
a role.
governorship of New York. It was a
The
two-year
boss
term,
of New
and
York.
I'm a reformist. I believe in
Senator
good
Platt,
government, civil service
gilded
reform.
boss, they
I'm a
called him.
progressive.
I
Was
believe the
offended
government
by
should
all
play
these
a
reforms.
role. He wanted me just to be a good old team player and allow the
boss
corruption
of
of
New
New
York
York to continue under my watch.
Senator Platt,
And I did.
gilded
And because of that,
boss,
he
they
decided
called him.
that they must get rid of
was
me.
offended by all these reforms.
He wanted me
It's
just
true,
to be a
they
good
had
old team player and
meeting
allow the corruption
with
of New York to continue
a posse
under my
of-
watch.
of extraordinary
And I didn't.
consultants.
And because of that, he
And
decided
some
that they
genius
must
among
get
them
rid
said,
of me.
I know what to do.
And
Let's
it's
nominate
true,
him
they
for the
had
vice presidency of
a
the United
meeting
States, and he will
with
never
their-
be heard from again.
Their posse of
I didn't want to be
extraordinary
the vice
consultants.
president.
And some
That's a
genius
cul-de-sac.
among them said,
Nothing good can
I
come
know
of
what
that.
to do.
Let's
You don't want to
nominate
attend
him
a
for the
funeral
vice
here in the
presidency
bridge
of the
opening
United
there.
States, and he will never be heard from
But I
again.
did it because I was called upon to do it. And
I
that's
didn't
what
want to
we
be the
do in a
vice
democracy.
president. That's a
I served for
cul-de-sac.
5
Nothing
days
good can come of that.
presiding over the
You
Senate
don't want
of
to
the
attend a
United
funeral
States.
here and a
5
bridge
days.
opening
And
there.
then they adjourned.
But I did it
I
because
didn't know what
called
I thought
upon
of
to do it,
of
and that's what we
resigning and
do
going
in
to
a
law
democracy.
school.
I served for
And
5
I was
days,
actually in the
presiding over the
Adirondacks
Senate of
in
the
my
United
own New
States.
York.
5 days.
And then they adjourned.
I was climbing Mount Marcy.
I didn't know what I thought
How
of,
many of you
of
have climbed
resigning and going to law school. Yes, good. And I was
The highest point in
actually
New York,
the
the source of the
Adirondacks
Hudson.
in my own New York. And when I was up there
I was
with
climbing
my
Mount
family,
Marcy.
how many of you have climbed
A
Mount
man in
Marcy?
black
Yes,
came
good.
jogging up the trail.
The highest point in New York, the
And
source
I
of the
had
Hudson.
a sense that something had.
And when
had
I was up
happened.
there
He told
with
me
my
that
family,
the president had been shot.
a man in
in
black
Buffalo, New York, came jogging up
on the 6th
trail.
of September,
And I had
and
a
that he was
sense that
likely to
something
die,
had happened.
and that
he
I
told
must
me
come
that
immediately.
the president had been shot. So I did in Buffalo, New York. And when I got to Buffalo, the president was dead, and that he was likely to take the oath of office in the house of a friend. I must come immediately. We had to scrounge for a tuxedo. We had to scrounge for a Bible. And when I got to Buffalo, the September of 1901, and I took the oath of office in the house of a friend. President of the United States, as it were, through the back door. Tuxedo. We had to scrounge. I wouldn't have wanted to come in this way, but it wouldn't do any good to whine about it. September of 1901, and I said I will do everything in my power to continue without change, as it were, through the back door. And the politics. I wouldn't have wanted to come in this way, but it wouldn't do any good to whine about it either. I had a huge agenda. And I said, I will do everything in my power to continue without change the policies for 7 years and the politics of my predecessor. But of course I didn't mean that. First filling in for McKinley, and then in 1904 I wanted to be elected in my own right, desperately. I served as the president of the United States for 7 years and 171 days. I campaigned vigorously, first filling in for McKinley, and then in November 1904 I wanted to be elected in my own right, my own election. I didn't want to be an asterisk in history. The largest plurality ever up till that time in the Electoral College, and the largest plurality in the popular vote. I said, now look what I can do. In November of 1904, I won and then that my own election in my own right by the largest plurality ever up till that time in the Electoral College, and the largest plurality in the popular vote. I said, now look what I can do. I made one of the gravest mistakes of my life. And then that night, I called in the reporters. 1901. They wanted the day of my greatest political triumph. What my plans were now. I made one of the gravest, and I said this, I said the wise precedent set by George Washington. I called in the reporters Jefferson of 2 terms only. They wanted has been a bulwark of American freedom. What my plans were now. Therefore, and I said this, I said the wise. I'm here to announce that in 1908, set by George Washington, I shall not stand Jefferson for re-election 2 terms only for the presidency because I will a bulwark of American freedom. They all gasped, gentlemen. I'm here to announce I was the youngest president of the United States. I shall not stand for re-election to the presidency because I will, and when I left, serve 2 terms. I would be the youngest former president of the United States, and I was in my physical and mental prime. I was the youngest president of the United States. I made myself a lame duck on that moment. Not 43 years old. I went back into the private quarters of the White House. I would be the youngest former president of the United States, and I was in my physical and mental prime. Theodore, I made myself a lame duck on that moment. I went back into the private quarters of the White House. And you know, turned to my wife many times thereafter. Theodore, do you regret that rash decision? Never do anything without checking with me first. Only once. Yes. Every day for the rest of my life. Many times thereafter. I had such an agenda for this country. And I said, and I had made myself a 2-term president. And people say, why didn't you just come back for the rest of my life? The people would have understood. They loved you. And the Republican Party would have been glad because you are the person who could win. And I had made myself the people of the country would say, yeah, people say, why didn't you just come back on that? They said, everyone would have been understood. They loved you. I wouldn't be okay. And the Republican Party would have been glad because I'm a man of my word, and I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. And people of the country would say, power as a president, as a political figure in this country, is that I'm authentic. Everyone would have been okay with it. The people know they don't always agree with it. In fact, often they don't, but they know that I'm a man of my word, and I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. And my power as a president, as a political figure in this country, is that I'm authentic all the time. The people know they don't always agree with me. In fact, often they don't, but they know that I tell the truth. So I left. Let me just stop to say, in March, wouldn't you like a president who tells the truth all the time and keeps his vows? Yes. Good friend. So I left. Good man. I left in March. He was a weak man. Of 1909. But to give him a chance, I handpicked my successor, William Howard Taft. I did something I had always wanted to do just after good man. I left. I went on a year-long safari in Africa. Oh, but to give him a chance, I love to kill. I did something I had always wanted to do just after. And I arranged with the Smithsonian and so on. It wasn't just to kill, it was to bring specimens back. We needed them. Oh, I had wanted to do this. And I did spend a year. I love to kill 512 major mammals. And I arranged with the Smithsonian and so on. It wasn't just to kill, it was to bring specimens. I left to give Taft a chance. And I did spend a year. Because I knew if I stayed, everyone would be looking over his shoulder at me for my reaction. And over 10,000 of other things. And he would be looking over his shoulder. I wanted to give him a chance, and I want to say this, I hope it doesn't sound egotistical. Because I knew if I stayed, but imagine would following be looking over his shoulder at me for my reaction. Imagine following me over his presidency. I can tell you that no family ever enjoyed living in the White House as much as we Roosevelts did. But imagine following me. And I can tell you without any
imagine following
possibility
me into the
of
presidency.
contradiction that no man
I can
ever
tell you
enjoyed
that
being
no
president of this
family
country
ever
more than I
enjoyed
did.
living in the White House as much as we
But
Roosevelts
I needed
did.
to give Taft a chance, and he failed.
And I can tell you without any
And that's why
possibility
when I came back,
of contradiction that no man
I
ever
was
enjoyed
pressed to
being
run
president
for
of this
a
country
third
more than
term.
I did and did.
But I needed to give Taft a chance, and he failed.
It was rigged.
And that's
The
why
Republican
when I
bosses
came back,
did these sort of things
I was
behind
pressed
closed
to
doors.
run
The
for
primary
a
system was
third
just
term.
beginning
And
did. And even though if there were polls, I would have been overwhelmingly
It was
the
rigged.
favorite, not only of the Republicans, but of the
Democrats,
Republican
too.
bosses did these sort of things behind
But
closed
because
doors.
of the way
primary
the
system was just beginning.
operating,
And
I
even
lost.
though
I
if
got
there were
29%
polls, I
of the
would have been
vote, the largest
overwhelmingly the
third-party
favorite,
vote
not
in
only of
American
the
history.
Republicans, but
To
of the
this day,
Democrats,
to your
too.
day.
But I lost.
But because
Not
of the
only
way
did I
the
lose,
system
but I
was operating,
made Taft
I
lose.
lost.
I got 29% of the vote.
And
the
Woodrow
largest
Wilson
third-party vote in American history.
became
To
the
this day,
president
to
of
your
the United
day.
States. May I say this?
But I lost. And not only did I lose, but I
unfit man for the
made
presidency.
Taft lose.
A brilliant
Woodrow Wilson
historian and a college
became the president of the United States.
He had
May
never
I
been
say
out of the
this?
country at the time he took the
A
oath of office, but
wholly
once he
unfit
went on
man
a
for the
bicycle
presidency.
tour of Scotland. A brilliant
There's nothing
historian
manly
and
about that.
A college president.
That's a sissy
He had
sort of
never
thing
been
to
out of the
do.
country at the time he took
It's a
the oath of
sissy way
office,
to
but
go about
once
life. And by the
he
way,
went on
to
a
you,
bicycle
the men in this
tour
room,
of
and some of the women
Scotland.
too. There's
Taft
nothing
asked me,
manly about that.
What is your advice to me when he was
That's a
running
sissy sort of thing
in my
to do.
wake? And I said,
It's a
Never
sissy way to go about
be
life. And by the way,
photographed
to you, the
golfing.
men in this room, and some of the women too.
Taft asked me,
I said, not only
What
is
is your
golfing
advice
a
to me when he was
sissy
running in
sport
my-
that no real man would
wake?
ever
And I said,
undertake,
never be
but if
photographed
you are
golfing.
photographed golfing, you are
distancing yourself from
I said,
average
not
Americans,
only is
because
golfing
average
a
Americans don't
sissy
have the
sport
time
that
or
no
the
real
money
man would
or the
ever
leisure
undertake.
to golf. And when they see that, they think you are
But if you are
an elite.
photographed
Said, if you want to
golfing,
govern this country, you must
you are
narrow the gap
distancing
between yourself and the
average
people,
Americans,
not
because
widen
average
it.
Americans don't have the
Well,
time
of course,
or
he
the
was
money
photographed
or the
golfing and
leisure
so
to
on.
golf. And when they see that, they
And
think
he
you are
lost.
an elite.
He went on to become a very
Said, if you
good
want to govern
Supreme
this country,
Court
you must
justice,
narrow the gap between
which is
yourself
what he
and
had
the
wanted to
people,
do all the
not
time
widen
anyway.
it. Well, of course, he was photographed golfing,
And
and
so
so
I should just tell you one story
he
about
lost.
He went on to become a
Bull Moose
very
campaign.
good Supreme
You
Court
probably know the
justice.
story. Which is what
It
he
was
had
late in the
wanted to
campaign,
do
had been
all the
utterly
time anyway.
exhausting.
I gave hundreds of speeches. I was indefatigable.
And so
my voice was
I should
giving
just
out.
tell you one story
And
about
we were
the
in Milwaukee,
the Bull Moose campaign.
and I was
You probably
giving
know
a
this
giant speech at a
was late in
civic
the campaign,
auditorium
had been
that
utterly
night.
exhausting.
I
I was
hundreds
totally
of speeches.
exhausted.
I was indefatigable.
And my handler
my
said,
voice
"Just-
was giving
just
out.
rest
And
for
we were in
tonight."
Milwaukee,
But the local committee
and I was
wanted
giving
to take
a
me to
giant
supper.
speech at a
and I
civic
felt that I
auditorium
owed
that
to
night.
them, so we went into
I was
supper. Now
totally
we were running a
exhausted.
bit late,
And my
and
handler
there was
said,
a
just
jalopy outside
rest,
waiting for me
rest for tonight, to whisk
But
me
the
there.
local committee
And when I came
wanted
out
to take
of
me
that
to supper,
hotel,
and I felt that I owed
got
that
into
to
the
them,
car,
so we went into supper. And now we were running a bit
a man
late.
named John
and
Schrank
there was a
at about
jalopy
15
outside
feet
waiting
away
for me
to whisk
shot
me
me
there
in the chest.
And when I came out of that
He
hotel
shot me.
and got into the car, I slumped. A man named John Schrank
said, "He
at about
picked me."
15 feet away. Now, I'm an old hunter.
Shot
me in the chest. And so I spat into my hand,
shot
and
me.
there was no blood in the spittle. I slumped, so I knew that I was not mortally wounded.
I said, "He picked me."
My handler said,
Now, I'm
"We
an
will
old
take
hunter.
you immediately to the hospital." And so I spat
said, "Oh,
into
no."
my hand, and there was no blood in the
I said,
spittle.
"I'm going to give this speech
So I
tonight.
knew that I was not mortally wounded.
If it is the last speech I ever give."
My handler said, "We will take you
Off we went to
immediately
the
to the
auditorium.
hospital."
And I got up here and I said,
"Oh, no."
podium, there were 1,000 people
I
there.
said, "I'm going to give this speech tonight." I leaned
it is the
against
last
the podium.
speech I ever give.
Blood
And
was
off we
shooting
went to
out
the
of my
auditorium.
chest.
And I got up
My
here
shirt
and
was
the
covered with
podium,
blood.
There were 1,000 people there.
The people were stricken.
And I said,
I
I just
leaned
want you to
against the
know that I
podium.
may not be at full strength tonight.
Blood
You
was
see, I have
shooting
just
out
been
of my chest.
assassinated.
My shirt was covered with blood.
And then do you know,
The people
I
were
gave
stricken.
an 84-minute speech.
I said, I just want you to know
At
that I may
84
not
minutes.
be at full
Finally, I was
strength
fainting
tonight.
dead
You see,
away.
I have just been assassinated.
And my men came and they said, we must take you out of here. So we were
And
going
then
down
do
the
you
central
know,
aisle.
I gave an
And as we went down,
84-minute
all these
speech.
people were standing up and
At
taking my hand
84
and
minutes,
shaking it.
finally
And
I was
shaking
fainting
theirs.
dead
It felt like
away.
a great moment.
And my men came and they
And
said,
only
we
later
must
did
take
one
you
of
out
my
of here.
handlers
So
say,
we were
you
going
know,
down the central aisle.
And
They
as we
just
went
wanted to be
down,
the last
all
person
these
who
people
ever
were
shook your
standing up
hand.
and taking my hand and shaking it, and I was
We
shaking
went to the
theirs. It
hospital
felt like
and
a
I
great
recovered.
moment.
And
only
But I
later
lost
did
the
one of my
election.
handlers say, you know,
Then
they
I
just
wrote my
wanted to be the last
autobiography, one
person
of
who
my
ever
40
shook your
books.
hand.
I invite you to read it.
We went to the hospital, and
then
then
I
I got an
recovered,
invitation to go
But I
to
lost
South
the
America
election to give a series of lectures. Then I wrote my
South America
autobiography,
didn't
one
like
of
me
my
very
40
much after the
books.
Panama
I invite you to
Canal
read it.
incident. Because we took
And
the
then I
canal
got an
zone.
invitation to go
We built the
to
canal.
South America.
When
to
I
give a
built the
series of
canal, which we
lectures.
needed, we must have an interocean canal.
South America
of
didn't
course.
like me very much after the
You know,
Panama
during
Canal
the Cuban
incident.
War, the Spanish-American
Because
War,
we took the canal
the
zone.
battleship Oregon was sent
built the
from
canal.
Puget Sound to come help
When
in
I
the
built the
Caribbean, and by
canal,
time
which
it
we
got there, the
needed,
war
we
was
must
over.
have an interocean canal, of
13,000 miles around the bottom
during
of South America.
the Cuban
I said,
War,
we've got
the
to be,
Spanish-American
if
War,
we're going to have
the battleship
California
Oregon
and
was
Washington
sent
and Oregon
from
and
Puget
Nevada, we
Sound to
must
come
be
help
a
in the
two-ocean
Caribbean, and by the
nation.
time it got there, the war
Our
was
Navy
over.
must be able to move quickly between.
13,000 miles around the bottom of South America.
I said, we've got to be, if we're going to have
Later,
California
I
and
was
Washington
accused
and
of being
Oregon and Nevada,
high-handed
we
in
must
this.
be a two-ocean nation.
And here's
Our
what I
Navy
said
must
out
be
in
able to move
Berkeley,
quickly between, and we
1910.
must create
I said,
that
I
canal.
suppose the right thing to have done would have been to put this to
Later,
the
I
United
was
States
accused of being
Senate
high-handed in this.
and let them debate this. And here's what I
said,
said
had
out
I
at
done
Berkeley,
so, they'd be still
1910.
debating it now.
I said, I suppose the right
And
thing
so I
to have
built the
done would have been
canal,
to put this to the
and
United
now they
States
can debate
Senate
me.
and let them debate this.
Because now that we have
I
it,
said,
nobody
had I
can
done
really
so,
be
they'd be
against it.
still debating it now.
I didn't live to go through it, but my wife did. And so I built
But I did
the
go
canal,
in 1906
and now they can
with
debate
with
me.
Edith, my second wife.
Because now that
was
we
married
have
once
it, nobody
before.
can really be against it. I didn't live to go through it, but my
I don't
wife
really
did.
want to tell that story.
But I did go in
My first
1906
wife,
with her, with Edith, my second
Alice
wife.
Hathaway Lee. I was married once before.
Was a beautiful little woman, athletic,
I
a
don't
tennis
really want
player.
to tell that story.
From the Boston area, part of the
My
Boston
first wife,
Brahmin class.
Alice Hathaway
I
Lee.
called her my little mousikins.
Was a beautiful little woman.
Oh, it was like a Charles Dickens
Athletic,
novel. A tennis player from the Boston
We were
area,
so happy
part of the
together.
Boston Brahmin class.
I
I
was
was a reformist member
I called
of
her
the
my little
New York State
mousikins.
Assembly. In fact, I was the youngest member
Oh, it was
of
like
the
a
Assembly.
Charles Dickens novel.
And I was up in Albany during the session, and it was
We
she
were
was
so
to give
happy
birth
together.
sometime in February, and I was a
But she had went into
reformist
premature
member of
labor.
the New York State Assembly. In fact, I was the youngest member of the Assembly.
I got a telegram.
And I was
that
up in
said,
Albany during the session, and it was
"A baby
she
has
was
been
to give
born.
birth
It's a little
sometime
girl.
in
She's in good
February.
health."
But she had went into premature labor.
Even my political enemies were slapping me on the back, and
Aye.
cigars were handed out, and
got
it
a
was a
telegram
glorious
that said,
moment. And
"A
then
baby
later
has
that
been
day,
born.
I
It's
got
a
a
little
second
girl.
telegram.
She's in good health."
It said, "Your wife." Even my
Her name was
political
Alice.
enemies were slapping me on the
This is
back,
the
and
only time
cigars
you
were
will hear
handed
me
out, and
mention
it was a
that name.
glorious moment. They said, "Your wife." And then later that day, I got a second
Who's
telegram.
dying.
It said,
Of
"Your
Bright's
wife."
disease, a
Her
total
name was Alice. Failure
This
of
is
her
the only time you
kidney
will hear
function.
me
You must come
mention
home
that name.
immediately. They said, "Your wife."
What a telegram.
Is dying.
I got on the train.
Of Bright's
there was
disease,
fog.
a total
It took more
failure
hours
of her
than usual
kidney
to come
function.
down
You
the
must come
Hudson
home
Valley.
immediately.
I got to New York and got a cabriolet to our house.
What a telegram.
When I came to the front door, my brother
got on the
Elliot
train,
opened
there
it,
was
and he
fog.
said, "Theodore, it took more hours than
There is a
usual to
curse
come down the Hudson Valley
on this house."
I got to New York and got a cabriolet
He
to
said,
our
"Alice
house.
is dying."
When I came to the front door, my
And so
brother
does
Elliot
Mother.
opened it, and he said, "Theodore,
My mother Mitty
there is a curse."
was 49 years
on this
old,
house, and she was dying
He said, "Alice is dying."
of typhoid fever, and so is Mother. I went
My
upstairs
mother Mitty
and said
was
goodbye to my
49
mother,
years old,
and she was dying.
and a few hours later, I was
holding
holding
typhoid fever. My beloved wife in my arms. I went upstairs
and she died.
said
too.
goodbye to my mother. It was
And
Valentine's
then a
Day.
few hours later, I was
1884.
holding
And the two most
beloved
important
wife
women in my world
arms.
died simultaneously in the same house.
and she died too.
I had
It
a
was
little
Valentine's
2x3-inch
Day,
pocket diary.
1884.
I put a
And the two
strong
most important
X
women in
on
my
that
world
date
died
simultaneously in the same
and
house.
said,
The
"The
light has gone out of my life." I had a
forever.
little 2x3-inch pocket diary.
Alice was 23.
I put a strong X on that
I
date.
didn't think I could go on.
and
But of
said,
course
"The
you
light
do.
has gone
go
out of
on.
my life.
You have no choice.
My
Forever.
vitality was enormous."
Alice was 23.
Then I said, "I will never remarry."
I didn't think I could go on.
Would be to
of
dishonor
course you
her
do.
if I ever
You go
remarried.
on.
I will.
You have no choice.
I
My
gave the little
vitality
girl,
was
also
enormous.
named Alice, to my sister Bammy to raise.
Then
I said, "I will never
went out to
remarry.
the
Badlands to grieve and to hunt and to
dishonor
bury
her
myself
if
if I ever remarried.
solitude.
I gave the
And
little
I made
girl,
this vow
also
never
named
to
Alice,
remarry.
to my sister Bammy to raise.
But then a year later,
I went out to the Badlands to
I
grieve
came back
and
to
to
New
hunt
York
and
on
to
some business or other.
bury myself in solitude.
And I walked into my sister's house, and
I
coming
made
down
this
the
vow never to
stairs
remarry.
was my childhood sweetheart. But
Edith
then a year
Carroll.
later,
I had
came
said
back to New York on some
Corinne, my
business or
sister,
other.
my condition of coming back
And
to
I
New York
walked
is
into
I
my
must never
sister's
see that
house,
woman.
and
Coming down the stairs was my
there she
childhood
was.
sweetheart, Edith.
And there was a
Carroll.
little bit of a stiff
I had said to
meeting.
Bammy and Corinne, my
And then
sister,
there was another
my condition of coming
moment
back
of
to New York is
tea.
I must never see that
And then
woman.
there was a thaw.
And
And
then
there
there was
she
a
was.
romance. And then
And
there
we
was a
became
little bit of a
secretly engaged.
stiff meeting. Secretly because I was
And then
so
there was
ashamed
another
of myself.
moment of tea.
And
And
then there was
second
a
marriage
thaw.
dishonors the
And
first.
then
I
there
said
was a
to my
romance.
sister Bammy when this all
And then
came
we
out, I
became
said,
secretly
you have to hope
engaged.
there's no heaven.
Secretly because I was so
Because if
ashamed
in
of
heaven we meet all
myself.
those we loved in life, there will be some awkward moments
Second
now.
marriage dishonors the first. I said to my
But
sister
Edith
Bammy
turned
when
out
this
to
all
be a
came out, I said,
splendid wife.
you have to hope there's no heaven.
We had 5 children together, rambunctious
Because if in
children.
heaven
I
we meet
once
all
said,
those we loved in
I don't
life, there will
trust
be some
any
awkward
man who
moments
wasn't
now.
something of a rascal as a child.
But Edith turned out to be a splendid
And
wife.
so we had these boys. And
We had
girls, and
5
of course,
children
you know
together,
about the first one,
rambunctious
you know about the
children. I
one
once said,
named
I don't
Alice.
trust
She
any
became
man
one of
who
the
wasn't
most
something of a
notorious
rascal
women
as
in
a
America.
child. She was
And so we
trouble.
had these boys and girls, and of course you know about
Oh
the first
my,
one.
was
You
she
know about
trouble.
the one
You know,
named Alice. She became one of the most
she would ask me,
notorious
tell me about
women
my
in
mother.
America. I said, no.
She
no.
was
Talk to your
trouble.
grandparents. I suppose some resentment
Oh my,
was
was
born
she
there,
trouble.
but I couldn't do it.
You know,
I couldn't talk about my first wife.
She would ask me,
And
tell
she
me about
became
my
a
mother.
rebellious teenager. I said, no.
You've heard
no.
the stories.
Talk to your grandparents.
She smoked.
I suppose some resentment was born
She
there,
smoked.
but I couldn't do it. I couldn't talk about
I
my
said
first
one
wife.
day, no child of mine will ever
And she
smoke in
became
the
a
White House.
rebellious teenager.
You know what she did? She climbed
You've
up on
heard
the
the
roof and
stories.
smoked there. She smoked.
She drove
She
around
smoked.
in the jalopy in the District
I
of
said one
Columbia.
day, no child of mine will ever smoke in the White
sometimes
House.
without a proper
You know what she
male
did? She climbed
escort,
up on the roof and smoked
and
there.
at times as much as 25
She drove
miles per
around
hour.
in
the jalopy in the District of Columbia.
She flirted with every
Sometimes
available
without
man
a
in the
proper
district,
male escort,
and some who, strictly
and
speaking,
at
were not
times
available.
as much as 25
And if I can
miles
speak freely
per
amongst
hour.
friends,
I believe she engaged
she flirted with
in heavy
every
petting.
available man in the district.
Yes.
And some who,
Yes.
strictly speaking, were not available.
We had a
And
house
if I
out
can
in
speak
Saginaw
freely
on Long
amongst
Island
friends,
in Oyster Bay. And I was there on one of the
I believe she
congressional
engaged
vacations, and
in heavy
and
petting.
all of her suitors were always coming by. There were
Yeah.
hundreds of them, you know.
Yes.
So one night
We,
I
you
was
know,
sleeping,
we,
it was
we had a
3
house out
a.m.
in Saginaw
and one
on
of her
Long Island in Oyster
beaux
Bay. And I was there on
drove
one
out
of
in
the
a jalopy.
congressional
He was drunk.
vacations, and
He
and
lost
all
control
of
and-
her suitors were
and
always
smashed
coming
into the
by. There
bo-
were
into the
hundreds of them,
into
you
the
know.
the gate.
So one night I was sleeping.
The
it was
Secret
3
Service,
a.m., and
now
one
we
of
had
her
a little
Bows
drove out in the
McKinley's death.
jalopy. He was drunk.
They came
He
down.
lost
he was
control
slumped over
and
the
smashed
wheel,
into the
passed out.
into the gate.
They
The
opened
Secret
the glove
Service,
box and
now
found
we
a
had a
pistol.
little. Now
That's
this is
what
serious
McKinley's
business. A pistol.
They came down. He was
at the
slumped over
president's summer
the
home.
wheel, passed out.
By now I had been awakened and I didn't know what was going on. I came
They
down to
opened
my
the glove
dressing
box
gown
and
and
found
said,
a pistol.
my goodness, what's
Now,
happening
this is
here?
serious business.
A pistol
And my
at the
favorite Secret
president's
Service
summer
man
home.
said, "May I speak freely?"
By now I had been awakened
I
and
said yes. He
I
said,
didn't
"This
know what was
man
going on. I came
appears
down to
to
my
be a
dressing
boyfriend
gown and
of
said,
your daughter's."
my goodness, what's happening
He
here?
crashed into the porch.
And my favorite
He's
Secret Service
inebriated,
man
he's
said,
passed
"May I
out,
speak
and I'm
freely?"
sorry to say,
He
I
had
said
a
yes.
gun.
He said, "This man appears
And
to
then
be
he said,
a boyfriend of
Mr.
your
President,
daughter's." He crashed
I may speak
into
freely.
the porch. He's
I think
inebriated. He's passed
he
out,
may
and I'm
be
sorry to say,
mentally
he had a gun.
ill. And then he said,
You know what I
Mr.
said?
President? Well, of course
I may
he's
speak
insane.
freely.
He wishes to marry Alice.
I think he may be mentally.
She got married in the White House?
You know what I said?
Some of you are parents. Well, of course he's insane. He
The
wishes
cake
to
was
marry
not
Alice.
adequate.
The champagne was swill.
Her dress was not what she had wanted.
She got married in the White House?
It was nothing.
Some
but
of you are
chaos
parents.
and ingratitude.
The cake
and
was not
aggression
adequate.
And
The champagne
what
was
is the term in
swill.
your time?
Her dress was not what she had
Bridezilla?
wanted.
it was
Yes.
nothing.
And finally,
but
when she and
chaos
her husband
and
left,
ingratitude
got in their
and
car to
aggression
drive off,
and
my
what is the
long-suffering
term in
wife
your
Edith
time?
came up to her
Bridezilla?
and kissed her on the lips for the first
Yes.
time. And finally, when she
Said,
and
"We're
her
glad you're
husband
going.
left
You've been
and
nothing
then
but
got
trouble."
in their car to drive off,
My
and later Alice
long-suffering wife Edith
got
came up
plenty
to
of
her
revenge on me.
and
She
kissed
was
her
as
on the
smart
lips
as
for
I
the first
was,
time.
and she had an enormous
Said,
spirit.
"We're glad you're going. You've been nothing but
in
trouble."
her defense.
At this time,
And
a
later
woman,
Alice
especially a woman
got
of the
plenty of
political
revenge on
elite,
me. She was as smart
could
as
not
I was,
work.
and she had an
She couldn't be an
enormous
author.
spirit.
She
And
couldn't
in
run
her
for
defense,
She couldn't be a
At this
college
time, a woman,
president, or
especially
even
a woman
college
of
teacher.
the political
Women had
elite,
almost no avenues
could
of
not
expression
work.
of their genius at this
She
time.
couldn't be an author. I regard myself as something
she
of a
couldn't run for
feminist.
office.
I
She couldn't
believe
be
that
a
a woman should
college
be able to do anything that a
president, or
man
even a
can do
college teacher.
if she can
Women
hack
had
it.
almost no avenues of expression of their genius at this time.
I wrote a
I
senior
regard
thesis
myself
at
as
Harvard
something of a
calling for
feminist.
suffrage for women. I believe that a woman
I
should be
believe
able
that
to do
women
anything that a
are
man can do
extraordinarily important
if she can hack it.
especially as reproducers of the race.
I wrote a senior thesis at
But
Harvard
not
calling
just
for
there.
suffrage for women.
So
I believe that
in her
women
defense,
are extraordinarily important,
she had
especially
a kind of straitjacket
as reproducers of the race.
but
She was trouble.
but not just there.
One time she did
So,
something and got
in
in the
her
papers
defense-
yet again. And my friend Owen Wister, you know Owen Wister, the author of The Virginian, he was part of my tennis cabinet. And he came to play tennis and he said, "Mr. Roosevelt, can't you do something about Alice?" And I barked back, "Look, I can govern this country, I control Alice, but I can't do both." And later in life, she said this, and this hurts a little, although it's funny. She said, "My father wanted to be the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral." And I suppose that's true. Now, I'm going to take your questions here in a moment. But I want to say just a few serious things first. Number one, when I became president, I looked around and thought, what is my function? What does this country need? What are the problems that need to be solved? What the 20th century is beginning. What is our destiny? You know, most American presidents have been caretakers. They don't really do anything. The presidency was a much weaker office in our time. Grover Cleveland, James Buchanan, non-entities. I was never going to be a non-entity. So I asked, what are the issues? Well, let me name a couple. What is America's place in the world? We had been an isolationist nation, but it was time for us to take our place in the world's arena. And I took us there. I took this country, sometimes kicking and screaming, into the world's arena. For example, Russia and Japan were at each other's throats in the Russo-Japanese War. It was destabilizing the future of the Far East. I decided to step in. And I invited representatives of Russia and Japan to come to the United States to work out a peace treaty. The Europeans thought of America, thinking that it could play a role in something of this importance. Well, I got them there. I bullied them sufficiently. They signed the peace treaty. It ended the war. It stabilized the Far East for a generation or more. And I won the Nobel Peace Prize. I was the first American president to win the Nobel Peace Prize. I gave the money away. Of course, no president should accept an emolument. No president, I don't care from which party, should ever accept a foreign emolument. That's forbidden in the Constitution. I don't know if you know that. Anyway, I gave the $40,000 away, and believe me, I needed it. I had to write books to make ends meet. I was also the first American president to go down in a submarine. 3 hours. It was called the Plunger. And it plunged. I was the first president to go up in an airplane. 1910. I went up for a heroic flight of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. I was the first president to own an automobile. I was the first president to have a telephone in his house. I was the first president to leave this country during his time in office. My wife Edith and I went to Panama to look at my canal in 1906. I was the first president to send a transatlantic cable to a foreign country. And I was the first American president to invite a black man to the White House. Think of this. It's 1901. We've been a republic at least since 1776. I'm the 26th president, and yet none had ever invited a black man to the White House. Black people dusted the floors, they served the meals, they did the wash, they cleaned out the toilets. But no president had ever invited a Negro to dine in the White House. This was early on after I became president. Booker T. Washington was an old dear friend of mine. He was in Washington. We were talking about presidential appointments down in the South. It grew late, and I said, why not just stay for supper with Edith and the boys? And he did. You can have no idea of the blowback. You have to look it up. The Richmond Telegraph, a newspaper in Virginia, said this was the damnedest outrage in the history of this country. Think of that, the damnedest outrage in American history, inviting a good man to dine in the White House? I won't go into all the details, but a senator in Alabama said we're now going to have to lynch 1,000 N's to put them back in their place. Think of this. There were 120 or more lynchings per annum at this time, some in the North. And for inviting a good man to dine, it was the worst political pushback I ever had as president. And I said, I will invite anyone I want to this house, and nobody can ever stop me. Anyway, our place in the world. Second question. Conservation of our natural resources. We were stripping the West. You are so fortunate that I stepped in. And no one else was going to do it. I wanted to create more national parks. You know, we had 5 when I became president. The first was Yellowstone back in 1872. There were 5. I wanted many more. I went to Congress and said, we should do this. And I had a long list. My forester, Gifford Pinchot, had been doing all this work behind the scenes, and many others. John Lacey of Iowa, a lot of really good people were working tirelessly to make this happen. But I went to the Congress, and Joseph Cannon, the Speaker of the House from Illinois, said, and I quote, "Not 1 cent for scenery." You think Congress is a mistake in your time? And let me speak freely. It would be so much easier to govern this country without Congress. The Senate is a concatenation of shrill eunuchs. And that's the more important body. You know, you might not even know your representative in Congress. They're little constituency men who handle visa problems and passports. Not 1 cent for scenery. I was able to get 5 new national parks through. And I'm happy to tell you that one of them was here, Mesa Verde National Park. I pushed and pushed and pushed with the help of John Lacey and others, and Congress did it. Thank goodness, and there were 4 others, Crater Lake, Wind Cave, and a couple that were later demoted. The National Antiquities and Monuments Act was passed in 1905. I had very little to do with it, but I welcomed it. And it was designed to protect small parcels like Mesa Verde, places where people were doing pot hunting, where people were disturbing the ruins of ancient peoples, people that were there for greed and not for proper scientific purposes. And I certainly support that. I named 18 national monuments, the first 18, by executive order. That's the power given to the president. It's an unlimited power given to the president by the National Antiquities Act to sign an executive order and to designate a national monument. I named 18, beginning with Devil's Tower, my beloved Devil's Tower in Wyoming. This included many others. One here, Wheeler, down by Creed. It's been demoted into something else, but it was a national monument then. I wanted the Grand Canyon to be a national park. Congress wouldn't do it. So I named it a national monument, a modestly sized monument of 828,000 acres. Now, the act was designed for 5 or 10 acre parcels, but I don't care because you have executive authority to do it. 18 national monuments. And about half of them later graduated into full national park status. I'm proud of that. I also saw, and I mean no disrespect to the ladies in this room, but I'm glad to see that none of you is wearing a hat. Because at this time, ladies' hats had feathers from exotic birds, egrets and pelicans and so on. And we were denuding the population of these extraordinary birds. I have a special interest in birds because I can't see, but I can hear. And I knew my birds. My first book was called The Birds of the Adirondacks. And I wanted to protect these birds. So I called in Philander Knox, who was my Attorney General. And I said, is there anything on the books that would allow me to designate a national bird sanctuary? He said, no, I've checked, and there is no such law. I said, let me ask a more interesting question. Is there anything on the books that would prevent me from designating a bird sanctuary? He said, no, not to my knowledge. I said, I do declare it. And in March of 1903, I designated Pelican Island and the Indian River in Florida as our first bird sanctuary. You call them national wildlife refuges. I named 51. You now have hundreds of them. They're the glory of the world. I invented this. Congress would never have done it. McKinley would never have done it. Taft would never have done it. Wilson. I called him that mere Nancy. Oh. I also tripled the size of our national forest system. 1891, the Forest Act gave presidents the right to designate national forests on public lands, and we had designated them 48 or 49 million acres up to that point. I said, let's get going. A lot of that occurred here. By the time I left office, we had added 150 million acres to the national forest system of the United States. Think of it. 150 million acres. We tripled the size. Eventually, Congress got a little weary of me. You know, there was a little bit of Roosevelt fatigue in my second term. And so this senator from Oregon, a man wholly addicted to the timber trust, in the pocket of the timber barons. Charles Fulton was his name, later indicted for corruption. He added an amendment to a key fiscal bill. You know, the kind that you have to sign to keep the government open? You know these, don't you? And he added this rider to it that said no new national forests in 6 northwestern states. Washington, Oregon, Alaska, etc. No, this hamstrings the president's authority to do this, but he put it in this rider and I had to sign it because if I hadn't signed it, all chaos would have occurred. Fortunately, I know my Constitution better than Charles Fulton, and there is a 10-day interim between the time you get the bill and when you must sign it. I called in Gifford Pinchot, and said, let's get started. And we named 16 million new acres of national forest, including some in Oregon, just to mess with Charles Fulton. My critics came and said, you are dictator, you are high-handed, you ignore American constitutional norms, you are out of control, you had no right to designate those forests. I said, well, the Constitution gave me that authority, and if you don't like it, impeach me. And of course, they went away just to grumble. And as I say, Fulton later went to prison. I told you I shot a buffalo in Dakota. In fact, I shot a couple in the course of my life. You can still see the Dakota one in the north room of Sagamore Hill. But I wanted to save the bison. And so I worked with William Hornaday of the Smithsonian, and we were able to do it. And by the time he ended the American Bison Association in 1935, they were out of trouble. It took government intrusion and intervention to save them. And every time I did something like this, the forces of capitalism and the forces of extraction criticized me and said I was high-handed and this is not the American way, and you've heard this 1,000 times. Let me tell you this. If there were no national government committed to conservation, there wouldn't be a redwood tree left in the world. they would have chopped down every single one. And then I added 4 national game preserves. And so altogether, to summarize, I added 230 million acres to our national forests, national monuments, national game preserves, national wildlife refuges. No president in your history has done as much, and I can tell you none would have either. So I'll take your applause on that one. Yes. And Congress wouldn't have done it. Congress wouldn't have done it. These men sell their souls to big industry. I'm going to just tell you one more story, although I have thousands to tell you tonight. I'm just getting started here. When I went down to the Amazon, I was invited by several South American countries to give speeches. They didn't like me very much because of the Panama thing. But I said, of course I have to go. And I would probably do some hunting there at the same time. And when I got to Rio, the Minister of Education for Brazil was waiting for me at the dock, and he said, President Roosevelt, a man named Colonel Rondon, Candido Rondon, the Lewis and Clark of that part of the world, has discovered a previously uncharted river, a tributary of the Amazon, we assume. We don't know. It's called the River of Doubt because nobody really knows. He wonders if you might like to join him on that exploration. I said, of course I will. It's my last chance to be a boy. My last chance to be a boy. The people at the Academy of Natural Sciences in New York wrote a stern telegram, said, we did not authorize this. You're partly sponsored by us, Mr. President Roosevelt. We can't be held accountable for your safety if you do such a thing. No, we must insist that you desist. I sent back this telegram. I've had a better life than the 9 next men I know. If I have to leave my bones in the jungles of the Amazon, I am entirely prepared to do so. And of course, they had to back off. It was really an adventure. That is an untamed river. There were piranhas, there were swampings, there was a mutiny, there was a killing. The natives were natives that had never been encountered by a white person before, and they were menacing and terrified, of course. Then I reopened an old wound in one of my legs, and an open wound in the Amazon is a sentence of death. And I got several jungle fevers, and I was beginning to infect, and I couldn't walk, and I couldn't eat, and I couldn't talk. My son Kermit was with me, and Candido Rondon, and I was in my tent, half dead. And you have to know, it takes an enormous amount to kill me. I broke almost every bone in my body at one time or another. And I said, boys, I can't make it. I have to die here. You have to leave me. I don't mind a bit. You have to leave me, because if you don't, you will die too. Our food had been spent and so on. They were all exhausted, but none like I. They said that during the night I went into these sort of dream-like fugue states, and I was quoting Coleridge's poem Kublai Khan, and Xanadu did Kublai Khan, a stately pleasure dome decree where Alf the sacred river ran through caverns measureless to man down to a sunless sea, and so on. My son Kermit was there, and of course this was a bad moment for him. He said, if I leave you here, Father, Mother will kill me. And so I said, very well, I will attempt to crawl out. And I did. I had lost 58 pounds, a quarter of my body mass. It shortened my life at least by a decade. But it was a great adventure. I wouldn't trade it. And you know what? They renamed the River of Doubt Rio Teodoro in my honor, the Rio Roosevelt. And the last thing I'll say about this is that when I came back and gave a lecture about this to the National Geographic Society, are there any British people in this room? Good.
The armchair geographers of Great Britain said I didn't do it, the river didn't exist, I made it up. They said that. I wrote a book about it. And I got myself invited to the Royal Geographic Society in London. And I went over there and I gave a chalkboard lecture and told the story. People were crawling in through third-story windows to hear me. I was a world historical figure. And I gave this lecture, and even those, I must find a useful word here, those bastards in the Royal Geographic Society had to eat crow. Think of it. Think of the British arrogance about America. And you know why? Because we were the new leader of the world. The British Empire was fading. Somebody had to fill the vacuum. We know nature abhors one. There was only one country that could fill the vacuum of world leadership. That's us. Imagine if anybody else did it. France. Portugal. We have an Anglo-Saxon destiny. We're the people that can civilize this world. Nobody else does it the way we do it. Well, anyway, I lived on. The last thing I can say is that when World War I came, I went to Woodrow Wilson, and I had written so viciously about him. I had excoriated him for lack of preparedness and for the silly telegrams he sent to Germany after they sank our submarines and so on. But now the war was declared, and I went to him hat in hand in the White House. And I said, that's just all wind in an empty street. I'd like you to let me take a harum-scarum group of Rough Riders to France. You know what he said? He said, Colonel, we all love you. Of course he didn't. And he said, you're too old. War isn't what it used to be. There's no room for a cavalry squad in France. It's industrial war now. It broke my heart. But I turned to my sons and I said, you're all going to war, every one of you. You cannot hold back. You are not going to take desk jobs. They will try to give you desk jobs because you're Roosevelts. You are not doing that. You're getting yourself to the front, and you will fight. And they all did, and they were all wounded, and one of them died. My youngest and most beloved child, Quentin, Quentikins I called him, was an early aeronaut. He was engaged in airplane warfare in France, and he was shot down by the Hun. Edith and I were at Sagamore Hill. A newspaper man came in the morning and said, we didn't know this yet. Said, I want to be here, Mr. Roosevelt. I think some news is coming your way. A couple of hours later, another one came with a telegram that said, your son Quentin is dead. No man is fit to live who is not willing to die for his country. I went into my office and sat alone for about half an hour. And then I returned to the porch and said to the newspaper man, I must now do the most difficult thing that I have ever done. I must go tell his mother. And I died about half a year later. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Theodore Roosevelt. Thank you, Mr. President.
Please, please, please.
It'll go to his head.
You're cutting into our question and answer time.
Sir, will you entertain questions?
I will
from
take a
the
few,
crowd?
if they're not too
We
intoxicating.
have some online, but we're going to start here in
let's-
the room.
Let's hear a few, on any subject whatsoever.
Thank you.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about your time up the road in Glenwood Springs? The Hotel Colorado tells some tall tales about a certain little stuffed bear.
Now, I was hoping this wouldn't come up, because I know you have a lot of state pride here in Colorado and so on, and that you claim the teddy bear. I'm sorry to say it's not really true. I'm sorry. Well, go ahead and claim it, Mythology is important too. But what happened was that I was on a bear hunt as president down in Mississippi, and we couldn't get a bear, and I couldn't come back without having killed a bear. I'm the president of the United States and America's most strenuous man. And so my handlers went ahead, and eventually they found this old she-bear, this decrepit old she-bear sleeping by a tree, and one of them clubbed it with a rifle and tied it to the tree. And then when I came a few minutes later, they said, Mr. President, you may now dispatch your bear. Well, you know what happened. I said, that's not sport. I'm not going to shoot that bear. You untie it. They did. It died from the wound, but that's another question. A cartoonist by the name of Clifford Berryman of the Washington Post drew a cartoon of this, and it had a little tiny cub bear here, and I was at this tree with my rifle looking back in indignation, and the caption was, "Drawing the line in Mississippi." And that cartoon was so successful that Clifford Berryman used that little iconic bear in every cartoon thereafter that pertained to me. So there were dozens of them. And then this is where you lose your primacy here. A toy manufacturer in Brooklyn wrote to me and said, Mr. President, my wife and I have a line of small stuffed animals, giraffes and elephants and so on. Would you mind terribly much if we named one of our little bears the teddy bear in your honor? Well, first let me say I don't like to be called Teddy. That's a boy's name. That's a diminutive. People did, of course, and I couldn't stop it. Bully for Teddy and all that. But I said, of course, be my guest. Well, I don't think this fad will take off, but go ahead. And that's the story of the teddy bear. And there are several other origin stories, and the one here is not without a shred of validity, but it wasn't the first. And so if that offends you, I'm sorry, but the truth matters here. But the teddy bear was born from a presidential hunting trip in 1902 in Mississippi. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Clay.
Yes?
When I read The River of Doubt,
Yes.
I was so infuriated reading page after page during preparation of this very arduous, uncharted journey. And you seem to have not, nor Kermit, taken a real interest in the preparation for the trip. And that led to a myriad number of problems that I thought in advance it could have been overcome. So were you just not interested? Were you still so glum about not winning the presidency again that you decided just to defer to these this very unqualified individual?
Well, first of all, how much time have you spent in the Amazon jungle? Yeah, next question. You know nothing about this. You know nothing about this. Yes, I'm the President of the United States. I have enormous duties. I've just run for office. I've written one of my 40 books. I put this other man, Zom, in charge of the provisions, and I trusted him to a certain degree. And we had the right provisions. We carried too much stuff, and we had to leave it by the side and so on. The boat didn't work that we were going to put together in the Amazon. But that says there's nothing. The reason that we got into this trouble was not bad preparation, and I had to get rid of Zom because he turned out to be something of an arrogant man. The reason that we had so much trouble is that this is a jungle, and the jungle eats anything that it can. And there were ants that were 5 inches long, and our mosquito netting was eaten through at night. And there were snakes everywhere, and we would swim in the rivers. And there were piranhas. I would give you 1 hour in the Amazon, madam, and perhaps it would bring some humility to your Q&A.
We have viewers from beyond, sir.
Yes, sir.
Please, what are your thoughts on how we as citizens can best act in defense of our democracy in these perilous times?
Well, now, it's your world now. I left it in pretty good shape. I can't make you, it's you. You are responsible. We have an elective system. You elect your congressman. Every 6 years, you elect your senator. You elect your president. If you assert yourself, they will listen. But since you don't, they don't. Of course, there are bad men and evildoers in the world, including here in the United States. If you're in this situation, you bear as much responsibility as any elected official. You must reclaim the country if that's what you want to do. It's not my job. It's, until elections are canceled in this country, you have it in your power to retire the entire House of Representatives every second year, and you should do so. This country belongs to you and not to men of power. And if you have let it go because you're so busy enjoying the good life, then shame on you. Now, you do lack great leaders, and I do want to say I'm tan, rested, and ready. I could bring this country back in a single term. Congress didn't like me. They didn't want to do what I wanted them to do, but I'll tell you why they had to listen. I was enormously popular. Enormously popular. Not in the Mark Hanna establishment crowd, but the people of this country. They had deep admiration for me because I'm colorful, I'm good copy, I say what I mean. And I was a war hero, and it never hurts to be a war hero. And what I did in Cuba, I was the only man on horseback. The Spanish were above with smokeless Mauser rifles. They were cutting us down like kingpins. They didn't hit me. I got some shrapnel. But I was the hero of San Juan Hill, not because it was a great battle, but because I showed the right courage. I wasn't afraid to die. I wasn't afraid to die. In fact, later I was asked if I had any regrets about my time in Cuba. I said, only one. I wish I had received a disfiguring and perhaps fatal accident, a shooting of some sort. I wanted to be wounded. That's a badge of honor. Some people thought that was a little much. I was also a popular and powerful president because I was the first cowboy president. I made my formation in the West. They knew I was an authentic cowboy. I stopped stampedes. I arrested gunslingers. I was a deputy sheriff. I broke all my bones. I was unafraid. There was a man who hated me, and he told my hired men, when Roosevelt comes back, we're going to come and shoot him. His name was Paddock. He was a known killer. He'd killed several men. I just had come in on the train from New York, 5 days, got off the train in Medora, rode 35 miles up to my ranch, got there, unsaddled my horse. My hired men said, this Paddock has said he's going to kill you on sight. I got on my horse. I rode back to Medora. I went to his door. I knocked on it and said, I understand you want to kill me. He backed down immediately, and we became something like friends. I have kind of a soft spot for killers. In the West, in Vigilante West. So I was a war hero. I was immensely popular. I was the first cowboy president. I was as colorful as it gets, and I spoke the truth. And if you had a person like that, of enormous energy and charisma and vision, I read a book a day all of my life. I know how to run this country. Now, you have to let the constitutional norms and guardrails hold, but I promise you I could do it, because it's not that difficult. It just takes a man of integrity and courage. One or two more.
Not without some smelling salts and a heater, sir.
You. Yes. I'll take 3 more, and then I will shift gears for just a moment. Yes, sir.
Mr. President, the Vail Symposium did a program last year with 2 historians, and they were debating who was the better of the founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson or George Washington. Do you care to comment?
Well, there's only one answer to this question. and that is George Washington, of course. Jefferson, a coward, he fled when the British attacked Monticello. He disarmed our military system so that we weren't prepared for the War of 1812, and when it came, it was worse because we weren't prepared. Jefferson would be a great president of a female academy somewhere. He's a visionary. The Declaration of Independence is one of the world's great documents. He was a brilliant architect. He was a Renaissance man. He had extraordinary gifts, greater maybe than anybody who's ever been the president of the United States. But he was not fit to be the president of this country. You know this. The best defense of America is to be armed so no one ever dares to attack us. And this Jefferson was a theoretical pacifist. What world do you live in, Mr. Jefferson? You think that wars will end because you're an idealist? Jefferson. And you know what bugs me? I have to spend eternity on a mountain with him in South Dakota. And you know, Lincoln is the best president in American history without question. I worship him. Washington, of course, belongs there as the father of our country. Jefferson, I suppose, purchased South Dakota in the Louisiana Purchase. I'll give him that. But only one of these four people ever lived in South Dakota. I. Yes. And, you know, people said to me late in life, this was way before, of course, Mount Rushmore. They said, what's a good monument to you, Mr. Roosevelt? And I said, not a statue. How about Roosevelt Dam in Arizona that made the desert bloom? How about America's Navy, that I was the most active supporter of the Navy in American history? Those are monuments to me. Statue, I said, and I really thought about this. You know, you see me as kind of a bully boy and a man of action and so on. I really see myself as an intellectual. And I said, you know, how many men are remembered after their time? How long does it take before history and oblivion just swallows you up? We remember Julius Caesar, and remember Paul, and remember Napoleon, and we know a handful of people. But almost everyone, including really important people, are swallowed up by oblivion in a short time. And I said, I will be too, of course, and I should be. But the Panama Canal? Now you're talking. Now you're talking legacy. But if I have to be on Mount Rushmore with this Jefferson, I do believe that visage is about the right size for me. One or two more. Yes, sir.
As governor of New York, you signed a piece of legislation called the Forever Wild Act that created the largest conservation set-aside in the history of the country in the Adirondack State Park. I wonder if you can talk about the political pressures that you faced in order to get that through, and how that might have informed your strategies as president when you were then going after national park land.
That's a very fine question, and there's a young man, I want to get his question for sure there, but it's a great question, and here's why. I trained for my life as a national conservationist in the state of New York. That was my proving ground, and I was able to get the Adirondacks saved, and this was a very difficult thing politically, but you know, at that time, the great moguls of industry, the malefactors of great wealth, the great capitalists like J.P. Morgan, they weren't interested in conservation, but they didn't bother to check it much either. I was able to get away with it before the opposition formed it. And frankly, 230 million acres of the public domain, which I say is one of my greatest legacies, it couldn't be done today. I did it before opposition could really form. I did it before people didn't even know where Nevada was. People didn't know what the Grand Canyon was. And people had no sense of these things. And so I was able to do it because there was so little really known, and therefore the opposition couldn't form. There was heavy opposition to the national forest I set aside here in Colorado, but I was able to overwhelm it. But later, it became more and more and more difficult. So, I mean, I would say this, and I certainly mean no disrespect to my predecessor, William McKinley, but the greatest thing that happened for national conservation in American history was that bullet in Buffalo. Because I promise you, none of the rest would have done it. They wouldn't have done it. They didn't have the will. I trained, and the person who helped me was Gifford Pinchot. Gifford Pinchot was the first scientific forester in the United States. He went to the Sorbonne to learn forestry in France. He brought that scientific. We had no scientific principles. We just cut trees down. That's all we did in that time. And government stood aside and clapped while these timber barons denuded and stripped the West. We were going to be raw. We were going to run out of natural resources. And so I stepped in as president in my first address to Congress. I said, conservation is the #1 issue in American life. Now, I'm a wise use man, not a preservationist. I don't want to lock up the West. We'll lock up some of it. But we'll use sustained scientific yield on the rest. And I remember when I first met Pinchot, I invited him to come to Albany. I was governor. And he tells a great story about it. He said when he got there, the governor of New York was lowering his children on a rope from third-story windows because there was an Indian attack on the house. And then I got that taken care of, and the children went off to play in some other way. And Pinchot and I had luncheon, and then we went downstairs, and I said, hey, you want a box? And so we boxed for a while. And then I said, hey, let's wrestle. And we wrestled for a while. You don't see that too much these days in your presidents, in your governors. But we became friends because we boxed and we wrestled and we understood each other, and we were not afraid of life. We were not afraid of life. Do you understand? You cannot be afraid of life. You must take risks. Of course, it was idiotic to go to the River of Doubt. I climbed the Matterhorn on my honeymoon. That was foolish too. But you must take risks. Life is about struggle. I'm a Darwinian. I'm not afraid to die. I'm afraid not to have lived. All right, this young person has a question. Then we'll stop. We'll stop. I promise.
Did you know you're in a play called It's about the newspaper boys' strike of 1999?
I do not know that. Do you know about it?
Yeah. Wait, what?
I don't know about it. You know, I'm often depicted in films and in other things. Do you know there are 8 pieces of video of me? They were filmed. Just 8. And they're quite interesting because this was when Edison was just bringing this technology in. And there are 8 recordings of my voice, and it's just as bad as the one you hear. I had this terrible falsetto. I don't know how anyone could listen to me for very long, and I've brought it down a little for you tonight. But I don't know about that play, but I would like to hear more about it, and I think you can find out more about it and let me know. And I will decide whether it depicts me in anything like a good light. So now let me close. May I? I want to bring you back to Dakota, because those Badlands, that time there was the making of my life. I wrote 3 books about it. And then I wrote my autobiography in 1913. And in it there's a chapter called In Cowboy Land, which is the best account of all of that. And I just want you to listen to this. It's short, and you may wish to close your eyes. You don't have to. But I want you to get a sense of what it was like. I said it was still the Wild West in those days. The West of Owen Wister's novels and Frederick Remington's paintings and sculpture. It was a land of vast, solemn spaces. We led a free and hardy life with horse and rifle. We worked under the scorching midsummer sun as the wide plains wavered and shimmered in the heat. We knew the freezing misery of riding night guard around the cattle during the late fall roundup. In the soft springtime, the stars shone glorious in our eyes each night before we fell asleep. And in the winter, we drove the herds through blinding blizzards that burned our faces. There were, to be sure, monotonous times when we moved the beef cattle in trail herds hour after hour at the slowest of paces. But minutes or hours teeming with excitement as we stopped stampedes and drove the cattle through rivers treacherous with quicksand and brimmed with running ice. We knew toil and hardship and hunger and thirst. And we saw men die as they worked among the horses and cattle or fought in evil feuds with one another. But for all of that, we felt the beat of hardy life in our veins, and ours was the joy of living and the glory of work. That's how it was. You still have some of it here. You must keep it. The American spirit was born on the frontier. That's what made us who we are, the people of gumption, the people that can do anything, the people that, yes, there's a little violence in us, but it's necessary sometimes. If you ever lose that, if you ever lose those vast silent spaces, if you ever let that achievement slip away, you will have betrayed the greatest gift you have as a people. The West is the redemption of the American spirit. You live in it. Get out and climb something. Thank you.
President Theodore Roosevelt. I'm going to keep you right here.
Oh, look, they're leaving.
And now this is Clay Jenkinson. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. I just want to say, I just want to say 3 sentences. Number one, I can speak in an actual human voice. Number two, I don't agree with everything that Roosevelt says, of course. But man, what an extraordinary human being. And the West has his imprint everywhere, everywhere. And thank God we had him, crazy though he sometimes was. And I think that it's so important that we, as American people, especially you who live here, understand what's at stake here. I'm not talking about the current administration and all of that stuff. We all know about it, and that's not my point. This precious thing that we have done. I've been camping this year. I followed the Lewis and Clark Trail all the way out and all the way back. I camp, I hike, I go on canoes. I sit around a campfire in the middle of nowhere. And you think, where else in the world can you do this? You can't do this in England. You can't do this in France. You can maybe a little in Canada. Well, then we'll soon have that. This is America. That's Roosevelt. You know, if you go to, last point, if you go to Glacier National Park and see that fantastic hotel there that we all love, that's not what Roosevelt wanted, because that was meant to be a playground for the rich. Come on the train, valets take your luggage, you go right into the hotel, you have splendid meals, you go out for a little walk now and then. The poor are not allowed, they're kept away, that's not their world, it's for the privileged. Roosevelt said, it belongs to everyone. And the great American experience is to go out there and sit around a campfire at the night and listen for the first coyote and watch the stars and eat camp beans and drink camp coffee and talk about America and talk about life. That's America. We have got to keep that. We have to cherish it, and it's going to be a struggle. And it's not just about politics. It's going to be a struggle because the forces of extraction are so deeply embedded in American life. But no other country can claim this. That's why Ken Burns, I'm having the chance to be in a couple of his films, had a film called The National Parks, America's Greatest Idea. It's not our greatest idea. The Declaration of Independence is our greatest idea, but it's right up there. So thank you very much. See you next time.